Hey there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to Reading Aristotle's Politics. Today we're looking at Chapter 3 of Book 7 of the Politics on the Best Regime. We're continuing what was the question of the best way of life in some aspects. Now we're turning to Chapter 3, so let's go do it right away. In regard to those who agree that the most choice-worthy way of life is the one accompanied by virtue, but differ about the practice of it. On the one side, they reject the holding of political offices, since they consider the way of life of free persons to be different from that of the political ruler, and the most choiceworthy of all. On the other, they consider the latter the best, arguing that it is impossible for one who acts in nothing to act well, and acting well and happiness are the same thing. We must say to both that they argue correctly in some respects and incorrectly in others. So there's two positions. One argues that the best way of life is virtue. The question is two types. One that argues that they reject holding political office, since they consider the best way of life is that a free person to be different than that of political ruler, and the most choice-worthy way of life. Therefore, the political ruler is too harsh. It keeps you from living the best way. He argues. In other words, it considers the best of a free person to be different than that of the political ruler, and the most choice-worthy of all. Okay. On the other, they consider the latter the best, the political ruler, arguing that it's impossible for one to who acts in nothing at all to act well, and that acting, praxis, the level of praxis is um, and happiness, you know, is the same thing. Now, both of these positions are kind of correct and they're incorrect. They're not completely same, right? On the one side, the one side is correct in saying that the life of a free person is better than involving mastery. Okay, so that's correct. That life of a free person is better than mastery, right? This is true. There is nothing dignified about using a slave as a slave. Giving commands concerning necessary things has nothing noble about it. In other words, dealing with necessity and dealing with the necessary things, and not living by choice and not living beautifully is nothing noble about it or beautiful about it, right? Cologne. But to consider every sort of rule as mastery is not correct. Again, this is the point. This is the point he talked about in book 1, book 3, that there's different types of rule, and mastery is only one type of rule. There's other types of rule. The rule of a parent, the rule of and political rule. These are different. Political rule differs even from parent rule and mastery, and therefore and political rule is the rule over free people, right? Um, it's not correct. Again, this repeats what he says in book 1, chapter 1, right? That political rule and the politicos and despotos are not the same kind of rule. There is no less distance between rulers over free persons, and there is no less distance between rule over free persons and rule over slaves than between what is by nature free and what is by nature slavish. Okay? So therefore, he's suggesting that wait a minute, there's there's there there is no less distance between the rule over free persons and the rule over slaves than between what is by nature free and what is by nature slavish. But these things were discussed adequately in our initial discourses. And I think this is 15. I think this is referring to book 1, chapter 4, about the natural slave, right? The natural slave, book 1, chapter 4 through chapter 7, in book 1, the first book. To praise inactivity more than activity is also not true. Okay? So therefore, that's the thing that inactivity is better than activity. This is not true. Happiness is a sort of action, praxis, right? Praxis is praxis, and actions of just and moderate persons bring to completion many noble things, beautiful things. Kolos, to talk, the takalos, the takaloi, takaloi, right? This is the beautiful things, the noble things, noble, beautiful things. Now, when such matters are discussed in this way, one might perhaps conceive of having authority over all persons best, right? In other words, this ruler of the best, this pampas leas, a ruler over all persons, who's be best. You perceive it like this way, right? For in this way, one would have authority over the greatest numbers of noblest actions. Okay, so this idea that, in other words, if everyone is acting in like this, and then therefore there would be the ruler who rules over all these noble actions would be the highest, right? This is the kind of weird sense here. So, on this understanding, one who is capable of doing so should not leave those nearby to rule themselves, but should deprive them of it. And a father should take no account of his children, nor children of their father, nor a friend of his friend, nor take any thought of it. For the best is what is most choiceworthy, and acting well is best. Okay? This is taking this argument to extreme, right? So if acting this is best, if acting beautifully is best, and then therefore ruling over those and making them best would be best, this would be the greatest thing, everything like this, right? Perhaps they argue truly in this if the most choiceworthy of existing things will belong to those who plunder and use force. Okay, again, this is interesting. Uh, this argument about ruling over everyone, dominating everyone, but this would be choiceworthy if uh, of existing things. If, in other words, perhaps this would be argued truly, right? If the most choiceworthy of existing things will be belong to plunderers and those who use force. Okay, but perhaps it is impossible that it belongs to them, and that this presupposition of theirs is false. Okay? So therefore, there are this argument that this such a rule that ruling over everyone and like this is the greatest. Well, that's only true if such thing is such things, these most choice things, will belong to those who plunder and use coercion, force. But no, but that's not true, right? This is a fault. Therefore, this presupposition of theirs is false. For action can no longer be noble or beautiful for one who does not differ as much from those he rules as husbands differ from wives, father from children, masters and slaves. In other words, okay, in other words, this is the idea that the common rule, the political rule is a common koinonia. The koinonia is a life in common. They share some good. They must share the good rule. Good rule is that there's common advantage. That the rule is being done here for the common advantage, in this sense, and for political rule. That political rule assumes a common benefit, common advantage of those who rule, and therefore in other words, this idea that actions can no longer be noble for one who does not differ, okay, as much as from those who rules as a husband differs from a wife. Again, this is not true. In other words, a husband does differ from a wife, but this is not the same as political rule. Father from a children, master, slave. In other words, this again. This we remember what he said in Book 1 that there's different types of rule, and political rule and kingly rule and mastery, despotike, and oikonomikos are not the same. They differ in kind. They're different forms of rule. And here, the father of a child is like kingly rule, or even like paternal rule, the household, right? Um, husband and wife. Again, husband and wife is the closest thing to political rule, but it's still there's inequality here, right? But there is still a sharing, right? The benefits here. It's masters and slaves. This is the one that is where has to be more coercion here. I think even a father children there's some coercion, master slave coercion, but again, who benefits? The master benefits the master slave, and the child benefits the parent child. The husband and wife is mutual benefit. Okay, even though the husband may rule the wife. Again, this rule it is not one of nature. It's not one of domination. It's sharing. It's a friendship, a philia, right? A love, a philia, as Aristotle says in ethics, right? the account of the marital friendship, right? In book 8 and 9 of the Nicomachean Ethics. So the transgressor could never make up the transgressor uh, could never make up ladder for the deviations from virtue he has already committed. In other words, a transgressor, someone who's transgressed, they can never make up later for the deviations of virtue they've committed. You can't undo. No, I can't compensate for something. If you deviated from virtue and you deviated from virtue, you can't make it up for doing something later. Among similar persons, nobility, the beautiful, and just the beautiful, the beautiful, the colon, right, and the just are found in ruling and being ruled in turn. So in other words, if people are similar, people are equal, and there's this idea, then the just and the beautiful here is being ruling in turn, politically. For this is something equal and similar. To assign what is not equal to equal persons, and what is not similar to similar persons, is contrary to nature. And nothing contrary to nature is beautiful, noble, cologne. So there's this idea, there's this, in other words, similar to similar, same. When you rule, the danger of political rule is ruling over the different, okay? Because the different is what? The different means you don't have something in common. The koinoi. If you don't have a koinoi, you don't see each other as one. You don't see your interest in your benefit and their benefit being the same. And therefore, you're going to want your benefit as opposed to their benefit, right? They're not going to be friends. They're not going to be brothers. They're not going to be people who have affection for each other, but rather see each other as others and maybe enemies or maybe not, and our and therefore by having different, they don't have a konoi, a common. They're different. They're not equal or similar in that sense. Um, uh, um, and I think that's a very important to understand for Aristotle, that there is something about similarity. This is, in other words, the more the more homogeneous, the more likely people will be nice to each other. The argument is, whereas when there's the more where there's great diversity and great heterogeneity, there's going to be more conflict because they're going to differ. They're not going to see each other as that. They may see each other as not sharing the same benefit and same good, and therefore to treat them the same is not going to be. They're not going to say themselves. I don't see them as my equal. I don't see them as something I share something with them, and therefore this leads to what I would like to dominate them, or they would like to dominate me. That's the conflict, right? That's the here. In other words, assigned to what is equal to equal persons, and what is not similar to similar persons is contrary to nature. Nothing contrary to nature is noble, a cologne, right? Beautiful, right? Hence, when another person is superior on the basis of virtue and of the capacity that acts to achieve the best things, it is beautiful, noble, cologne, to follow this person and just to obey him. So therefore, in other words, if someone is really virtuous, and they're standing in virtue, right? This is the discussion, and one should obey them, right? If you notice this and you accept it, it is noble, it's beautiful to follow this person and just obey that person, right? Again, that's the Pambas discussion of the Pambas land at the end of book 3, right? The last chapters of book 3. This almost like this. Not only virtue should belong to him, but also the capacity. So they're not only virtue, but the capacity on the basis which he will act. Now, this is note 16. Again, this is book 5, chapter 9, right? This capacity to act. This whole thing about what makes a regime possible. Not only virtue, but the capacity to virtue, right? This is one of those capacity points he brings up. But if these things are beautifully argued beautifully, If these things are argued finely, right, argued beautifully, right, or nobly, and happiness is to be regarded as the same as acting well, um, you know, acting well. The best way of life, both in common and for every city, common for every city, and for the individual would be an active one. So therefore, if these things have been argued finely, and happiness is regarded as the same as acting well, right? Uh, the best way of life, both in common for every city and for the individual, would be an active one, the active life, the life of activity, praxis, life of doing, life of living. Yet, the active way of life is not necessarily in relation to others, as some suppose, nor those thoughts, alone active that arise from activity for the sake of what results. In other words, that this is interesting. That the active way of life is not necessary in relation to others, right? That I can act for my own purpose. I not only act for others, but I can act in my own regard, right? That's true. Nor thoughts alone arise from activity for the sake of results. In other words, I don't necessarily do it. I don't think things to get the result. I think things and then I do things that get. In other words, it's not utilitarian. It's not for this. This is interesting that arise for activity for the sake of what results, but rather much more those of that are complete in themselves. In other words, the thoughts in themselves, the desires in themselves, right? And the sorts of studies and thoughts are that are for their own sake. In other words, it's not I'm not just doing it for utility, for purpose. I'm not thinking these things as means, but rather there's some kind of thoughts that are complete thoughts are for themselves, and that sometimes thoughts are not done. I'm not doing things for the sake of others, but rather for the sake of this, but for my own concern, right? So therefore, some thinking and some actions are not merely actions for the collective or for the sake of others, but for one's own, for themselves. And then also that there's some thoughts that are not for the sake of things, but are thoughts in themselves. So they just the highest thoughts in this like this. Acting well is the end, right? Acting well, acting, praxis, the praxis, this acting, right? Beautiful, well is the end, the goal, right? So it too is a certain action. So this is a kind of action, a certain action. And even in the case of external actions, we speak of a master craftsman, right? Whose activity consists in thought. In other words, that even action consists of a craftsman who's someone who is going to do something. Well, even in action, there is this activity of thinking about things, right? Consistent thought as acting in the authoritative sense. In other words, the master craftsman is deliberating on what is to be done and how to be done, and that's a thinking. And this is an act, and this thinking itself is an acting in a sense, in an authoritative sense. This deliberating about what should happen or what should be done, or how it should be made, or what should happen, and how to do it, and how to do it well. Right? This is prudence, right? The prudential actor is concerned. And prudence is that type of intellectual virtue of reasoning, true reasoning that deals with praxis, action. So therefore, this is authoritative in this sense. This is in a sense that they're acting in the authoritative sense. This is thinking in the authoritative sense, deliberation. Indeed, not even cities that are situated by themselves and intentionally choose to live this way are necessary and active. So, in other words, even if cities that are isolated and alone are not going to be inactive, they're going to be active because they're living their lives. They're trying to be good. They're trying to maximize their happiness, right? For activity can come about relative to a city's parts. There are many sorts of shared activities undertaken in the part of city in relation to one another. Again, this is literally communities, carnoia, right? The carnoia, literally carnoia, literally shared activities, carnoia, undertaken in a part of a city in relation to one another. So cities are engaged in carnoia. Cities in themselves And then cities in relation, there's koinonia. Remember, koinonia is not only involved in the city. The city is, there's a reign. The koinonia is at the realm of the husband and wife. The koinonia is at the household is a koinonia. The city is a koinonia, but the tribe is a koinonia. But then the genos is a koinonia. The koinonia is this range of things. Now, the city is that perfectus, that a peak of koinonia, right? Where happiness is best achieved, that being able to live one's life is best achieved. It is that point on the scale of it is that level of koinonia, that place of koinonia, of commonness, where that is most complete, right? That is most complete. That is most akars. That is self-sufficient, right? It is able to. It's a Latin is perfectus, right? Perfectus communitas. The koinonia is this. It's at its peak, and it's able to achieve the eudaimonia, and the living well that enables eudaimonia for the human the per people. This is possible in a similar way for any individual human being as well. So what is true in the social world is also true in the individual world, right? For otherwise, the God and the entire universe could hardly be in a beautiful condition, since they have no external actions beyond those that are proper for themselves. So the universe itself, the cosmos, the universe is not external. There's nothing external towards it. It's this nature. And that the God Himself is not defined externally, but rather by who He is and what or it is in that sense. In other words, the God, regardless of external things. In other words, He's not judged by the externality, but itself, right? So therefore, this is right. For otherwise, the God and the entire universe could hardly be in a beautiful condition, since they have no external actions beyond those that are proper to themselves. That the same way of life must necessarily be best both for each human being individually and for cities in common, then is evident from this point. This is this weird argument. He gets this argument. And if this is the case, then we get the argument here. We get here the argument that what is good, what is the best for the individual, and what is best for the city and for human beings. Now, this says even more in common. In other words, it's not only this; it's all humanity in common is evident. So the best is not merely what is best for cities and the man, but the city, the individual, what is best for human being individually, and for cities, and for again the koinonia and humanity is a koinonia, right? But the problem here is that there's different levels of koinonia, and if the city is that point where there's a peak of this, the individual is deficient. He's not able to achieve happiness on his own. He has to live his happiness unless he's a god. Only a god is able to achieve blessedness and happiness. This thing. We Our happiness is found in koinonia with others. Okay, so the city is that peak moment where the human being is able to achieve koinonia. Not koinonia, achieve the koinonia of no, sorry, not achieve koinonia, but achieve happiness, achieve that best way of life, that living well. It actual helps them actualize living well. This is that. In other words, these the household and the man by himself and the household. These are instruments. You try to live well, but it's only in the polis, only in the political community that 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 this artakas, this self sufficiency, which means self sufficiency means the actualization that one could achieve the best way of life or the living well. So that's how we end it, and this is how we end chapter 3. So let's stop here. If you have any comments or questions about this or points you want me to address further or look into, again, please give them here. Ask me questions. I'll see when I see them. I will respond to them. If you liked it, like it, share it with a friend, share it on social media. Do this. Help us spread it. If you are not subscribed, subscribe. Encourage others to subscribe. That helps. Didn't like it? Say why. Put comments on it so I can maybe I can learn something from this. Um, um, you can follow me on social media. Links are below. If you want to help contribute to what I do here, you can do so by becoming a member or subscribe to our Patreon. Um, and if there's monetization, you can do things with monetization. Um, I need more to grow, some more to get monetized, but that's either here or there. Another thing you can do is one other way you can help me if you don't want to be a subscribed star to Patreon, you can do this by buying my book, my 2020 book, A Notebook for Aristotle's Politics. This is a kind of a study. It's a workbook. It's a study guide. It's a guide to approaching Aristotle's politics. It's not a commentary. It's like Cliff's notes. It is a study guide aid as you approach the politics. It looks at the politics chapter book by book, chapter by chapter. It gives us summaries and outlines and diagrams, and it helps you get a better grasp of the text to understand it better. Again, it's not interpretation. It's just a guide as you reading the book to kind of get a better grasp of it, get better understanding. If you buy it by Lulu, I get a better share of it. In other words, it's made by Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and most online distribute things. If you got it, they're going to keep their make profit. They make some money, right? They make money doing it. If you buy by Lulu, I get that little profit rather than Amazon. But okay, so Amazon might give you free shipping, so I'm not going to complain. I'll still get something. But so share it with, buy yourself a copy, buy your friend a copy. If you know some students doing this, that recommend that to them, please. That is the way you can help. And that's it. Here we end. We'll see you next time. We'll look at chapter 4. You can see it right here, chapter 4. We will see you tomorrow, okay? And have a good day. Bye-bye.